Hey everybody, this will be my last vlog of the UK trip 2021 and I'm back home now. As you can see, I'm in my home office and I just wanted to recap a couple things for you in terms of like observations I had and just some notes I had about the trip. Maybe some questions you might have. I don't know if these are actual questions of yours, but just some things I thought would be nice to reflect upon just to wrap up my trip. So sit here with me while I go through my journal. I have some notes about this trip. So maybe just some curiosities you might have had about the UK or England or Scotland that I just wanted to go over. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was safety. I always felt very, very safe in the UK. Never got looked at funny, never felt like anything of mine would be stolen or, taken. I never felt like I was in any area where I could be pickpocketed. Just never got any creepy or unsafe vibes. However, I never took that safety for granted. I always made sure that I kept my things close. I always made sure I kept like my bag zipped. Just kept a good eye on all my things because and as well as taking care of my own personal safety. I did not spend a lot of time walking around at night by myself after dark. Just kind of as a rule. I did do it a couple times and I did feel safe, to be honest, but I just didn't want to put myself in any unnecessary, unsafe situations if I didn't have to. You know, being alone, traveling as a female, I just didn't need to tempt fate and be unsafe. So I kept myself as safe as possible, and luckily that vigilance paid off. The next thing is ease of travel. I never considered renting a car for this trip because I didn't want to incur that expense. I didn't want to incur that responsibility, actually, is more of a bigger reason. Because I had heard that renting automatic transmission vehicles over in Europe is either difficult or more expensive, and obviously I don't have a great ability to drive a manual transmission, so I would have had to rent an automatic, either impossible or expensive to do. I didn't want to have to drive on the other side of the road, and just being alone, doing all the navigation by yourself with all those things considered, just thought was a recipe for disaster. So I never even considered renting a car. So that did mean that I had to go around 100% by public transportation. And I will say that in the UK, things are very well hooked up. The big cities, it's absolutely totally easy to get places, whether you choose to go by train or you choose to go by like a charter bus. There's a wide variety of costs. You can take inexpensive buses, or you can take trains, which are a little bit more pricey. I took more trains than I ever have. Actually, it's the first time I ever took trains in the UK was this trip. They were pricey. If you reserved tickets ahead of time, it was a little cheaper. But they were all very nice. They were very comfortable, and they had amenities like Wi-Fi internet and power plugs, so you could charge your devices. Buses can be great too. They can just tend to feel a little more crowded, and they can take a lot longer. But you can save some money that way. I only had one issue with a train, which ended up getting stuck due to overhead wire failure. It was on my last leg of my trip to come back into London to take my flight out. I was not in a time crunch, but I actually got like 2 to 3 hours tacked on to my trip that day, and it just meant that I got back into London quite late that evening at about 10 p.m. But it was actually really cool. I did meet a friend, a young woman about my age who we ended up tagging along together on the remainder of the trip. So when going around via public transport, you just have to be very patient because of course you don't have your own car that you can just jump in whenever you're ready to go. a lot of my travels took different legs of a trip. Like it wasn't just, when I went from big city to big city, it was just one leg of the trip, and there I was. But there were a couple of places that I went to, the more remote areas, more countryside, where I had to take trains and a mixture of buses, sometimes city buses, which seemed like they would be charter buses because they were such long trips, such as an hour and a half, but they were just long because they stopped so many times at so many stops. But it just required a lot of patience, which is honestly what I had. I was there for a month, so a good portion of my time was spent actually moving from place to place, but I had that patience, and it was better than the alternative of the whole responsibility of renting a car. The only other thing, obviously, that's a little regrettable about only having public transportation is there are some places that it just does not go, or it is difficult for it to go. So having a car would have been more convenient to have a little bit more freedom of movement. However, I didn't want to do that for myself. So if I was going with another person or a group of people, renting a car might make a lot more sense. Hotels. I was actually really pleased almost completely with every hotel that I picked. I actually ended up staying in a mixture of hostels, guest house, which are also kind of like just a bed and breakfast, and actual legitimate chain hotels. I picked those based on where they were, their cost, and reviews. I tried to always read reviews really well and make sure everybody was had good things to say about places that I picked. Everything was always within about 1 mile to a transportation hub. So when I got into a city, I only ever had to end up pulling my luggage 1 mile or less. That was kind of my maximum that I would, cart around my luggage like that. But I was really pleased with the different places that I ended up being. Some stays were very unique. Some stays were really nice. Some were just adequate, but I always felt safe and comfortable in those places. And the UK and Europe in general, I think, has a lot wider scope of different types of places to stay. Obviously, being a solo traveler, I only had to book space for just one person. So the rooms did not need to be large. They only ever had to have one bed. But I also just, being me, I didn't require a certain level of, extravagance in them at all. I just wanted something safe and comfortable and private where I could, have a nice, clean, soft bed, preferably a bathroom in the room. And a place to keep my things during the day while I was out traveling. And I think in Europe, there's a wide variety of hostels, which obviously you can stay in for a inexpensive amount, but you are going to be sharing that with multiple other people. And I just was feeling that at my age and at the comfort level that I wanted, hostels with several rooms and several beds in a room were not what I wanted to do at all. But hostels are an option. Small guest houses with just a few rooms are an option. Obviously, like chain hotels, there's lots of those. But I just, when looking for things, I found more of a wider gamut, and even things that seem to be more focused towards solo travelers, which I think is kind of a little bit bigger of a concept in Europe as a whole in comparison to the United States. Whereas in the United States, I feel like we just have a lot of the chain hotels, and you're at least putting away $150, $200 a night for stuff like that. That's nice. But my budget was to spend $80 or less per night on average for accommodation. So that got me to where I wanted my accommodations budget to be. I had about 6 nights that were absolutely free because I stayed with a friend out of the 30, and then I had quite a few nights which were well below that 80, and then I had some nights that I splurged. So on average, I spent just around the 80 per night in total to reach my budget of $2,500 for the accommodations portion of the budget. COVID-19 and the pandemic. So taking this trip right now in this part of my life was perfect timing for every other reason than COVID-19 and the pandemic. I never would have considered traveling anywhere else right now than the UK, and reason being is I felt like in the UK I could have a handle on just what the restrictions might be. I fully could understand, both culturally and, in the language, like what the restrictions were going to be. And I figured it would be relatively easy to navigate the COVID specific stuff. And in terms of like safety, taking it seriously, I wouldn't have gone to other countries that maybe didn't have quite a high vaccination rate, or just handle on the pandemic, although you can argue things are still going rampant in the UK. So traveling in the pandemic did add a not insignificant amount of money to this trip and stress. So I ended up spending about $130 extra total for testing, both coming and going, which was completely required, so that was an expense that I had no choice but to incur. And in terms of stress, it was very nerve-wracking because I didn't actually realize because I was so focused on testing and getting my testing over with once I got into the UK per their requirements. I did not realize that the American CDC required a negative test to come back into the United States from anywhere for citizens, for whomever, vaccinated or unvaccinated. So I did not realize that until I got over to the UK. And so that meant that I had looming over me the entire time the fear that if I contracted COVID while I was there, and I could not test negative when it came time to get on a plane, I would be stuck there having to quarantine for an additional 10 days. So that would mean 10 more days on top of the 4 weeks away from my family, as well as 10 more days of food and accommodation. So that was an absolute last thing I wanted to have happen. So while I was there, I masked 100% of the time I was ever in an indoor setting, in a crowded area, even in streets, outdoors where there were a lot of people, I masked. In England right now, there are not many people masking, aside from in the Transport for London area, which is the underground underground subway in London. But I did not see a lot of masking in restaurants and in other indoor settings in England specifically. When I crossed over into Scotland, they were masking a lot more. They were pretty much wearing them in any kind of indoor setting. So regardless of what was happening in the country, I was wearing my mask 100% of the time. That was pretty much my only precaution. Obviously, I'm fully vaccinated. I was washing my hands very frequently using hand sanitizer, which was very prolific around every area there. But I was just doing my best to keep healthy. And, obviously I didn't want to get it either while I was there, because who would take care of me? If I had to quarantine, how would I get groceries and food and whatnot? So luckily, nothing happened. I was able to test negative like about 36 hours before I left. And basically at that point was finally when I felt like I could relax, because I knew I was not going to get stuck there. But I just was extremely vigilant and took that very seriously, because it would have been a very big consequence for me to contract COVID while I was traveling. And when I first got there, it was extremely stressful. I did kind of relax a little bit, in terms of just realizing like I could only do what I could. I was vigilant, I was cautious, and just continued to do that until the end of the trip. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about the accents. It was super fun. I love accents, and it was super fun being around so many different ones. I had one night that I was staying in probably the worst accommodation I had. It was actually above a pub, and there were some people fighting outside at like 2 a.m. And I really wasn't mad because they were fighting in these accents, and I found it really hilarious. So I was like, go ahead, keep fighting. It's kind of funny. It's kind of fun to listen to. But it was really cool to, hear the different London accents and then hear the Cornwall accents. Everybody calls you love over there. The Yorkshire accents were cool, and then getting up into Scotland, which is my favorite accent, those were fun to listen to as well. I was called out a couple times for my American accent, which was really cool because, like I said, I love accents, and when you live, in one place that everybody shares that accent, you don't feel like you have one. So it's kind of nice to be unique in that way for a time. There was just, a couple people who called me out for being American, and it seemed like that was, really well received, which of course was fun. It's funny, at first I had this weird thing, like I didn't know if people were gonna understand me when I spoke, like they weren't gonna understand my accent, which was completely ridiculous, but I was like, maybe I need to, adjust my accent a little bit to be understandable, but of course they understood me. It's not like they haven't heard American accents before. They watch a lot of American TV and music, so that's not a problem. So overall, it was a fantastic trip, and it was really a cool time that gave me kind of an intellectual infusion, really kind of awoken different things in me in terms of different, places that I've always wanted to see, that I've, gotten to now be in. And I just got such a wide view of the whole entire island. I really am just, kind of excited that I got to see those places that historically I've always loved, shows and media that I have enjoyed. So it was just a really cool time to do a lot of exploring. I'm really fortunate that I was able to, afford this trip and have the support of my loved ones behind me. So thank you so much for listening to me talk at you for a while. And yeah, look forward to the rest of my adventures. I think I'm going to lay low for a while, so might not see much coming out of me for a while, but yeah, it was fun nonetheless, and I will look forward to the next one when I've had my rest. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.